Okay, let's dive right in. There's this huge trial kicking off in New York, Sean Diddy Combs. And the charges, wow, they are really serious. We're talking sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy,
Mm-hmm.
transportation for prostitution.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And we're using the BBC News reporting as our main guide here for this deep dive.
Right. So our mission really is to unpack those opening statements. We want to get you the essential arguments from both sides, without getting bogged down in all the legal speak.
Exactly. Cut through the noise. And it's worth saying up front, like the BBC noted, some details are pretty distressing. So just a heads up on that.
Good point. Okay, so the prosecution, what was their opening salvo? What's their main argument?
Well, they came out making a really big claim that Combs ran a criminal enterprise for 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, and that he had staff helping him do it. A key part is this idea of power coercion. They said he had the power to ruin victims' lives. That's crucial for them.
Power to ruin lives. Wow, and they focused on specific people, yeah.
They really zeroed in on two alleged victims, primarily in the opening. R&B singer Cassie, of course, and another woman who hasn't been named publicly.
Okay, and what specific things did they allege he did?
Well, the allegations were quite graphic. The prosecution talked about physical violence, kicking women, pulling their hair,
Okay.
even breaking down doors. And then there's the whole sex trafficking angle. They allege he forced partners to take drugs and engage in sex acts with prostitutes.
So painting a picture of real control and exploitation.
Exactly, a system, they claim, not just isolated incidents.
And that hotel video, the one showing the assault on Cassie, that came up, right?
Oh, definitely. The prosecution really leaned on that. They said when she tried to run away, he always found her.
Chilling.
Yeah, it really speaks to that alleged control, that feeling of being trapped they're trying to establish.
So it feels like they're arguing this is much bigger than just bad behavior or individual assaults.
Absolutely. They were very clear on that. They said this goes way beyond, quote, celebrity sexual preferences. Their words were coercive and criminal.
Coercive and criminal, that's the bar they need to clear.
Right. For the trafficking and racketeering charges, they have to prove it was organized, illegal, not just, bad choices. They also brought up that really disturbing claim about forcing Cassie to have sex with male escorts,
Right, I saw that.
and then using footage to blackmail her. That speaks to a calculated plan, if true, maintaining silence, control.
Okay, so that's a pretty stark picture from the prosecution. How did the defense counter this in their opening? Must have been a very different story.
Completely different strategy. It seems like they're going for let's call it a partial admission, maybe. They acknowledged some of Combs' flaws.
Like what?
They admitted he could be angry, even violent. And crucially, they talked about that Cassie assault video. Called it indefensible evidence of domestic violence.
Indefensible, so they concede that part.
They use that word indefensible, which is a big admission, but then they immediately pivot.
How so?
Their argument is, okay, that's domestic violence. Terrible, yes. But it's not sex trafficking. It's not racketeering. That's the line they're drawing.
So how do they explain the other allegations, the ones about forcing drug use, sex with prostitutes?
They framed it as a swinger's lifestyle. That was their term. They talked about consensual threesomes by adults and something called freak-offs.
Freak-offs. Okay, what does that mean in this context?
According to the defense, these were like multi-day sex parties. But, and this is key, they stressed these were consensual among adults.
Consensual.
That's their argument. And they made a point of saying, look, these alleged victims, they didn't call the police back then, trying to suggest it wasn't seen as criminal at the time by the participants.
Interesting. So part of their strategy is also focusing on the alleged victims themselves?
Seems like it, yeah. They described the women as capable, strong women
Okay.
and argued that they chose to stay with Combs, that they were, quote, getting something from the relationship.
Getting something. That sounds tricky.
It is. The defense lawyer apparently said Cassie made a choice every single day to stay with him, even after that assault they called indefensible.
So putting the onus on her choice to stay.
Exactly. It raises really complex questions about consent and agency, especially, in potentially abusive situations. Legally, they have to convince the jury these women acted freely, despite the violence they've already admitted to.
Did they try to sort of humanize Combs at all?
They did touch on his background, mentioned his Harlem roots, humble beginnings,
Yeah.
The self-made man narrative.
Trying to build some sympathy, perhaps?
Could be. And it's important, as the BBC noted, Combs denies everything. All the charges. He rejected a plea deal. He's fighting this all the way.
Right. Okay, so shifting gears slightly. The trial mechanics. Jury's picked.
Yep, jury selection is done.
Yeah.
You've got 12 jurors plus 6 alternates. It's 8 men and 4 women on the main jury.
And opening statements are finished. What's next?
First witness is expected soon. So now we move into the evidence phase. Hearing testimony, seeing exhibits.
Got it. And the lawyers. Any big names we should know?
Definitely. On the defense side, you've got Mark Agnifilo and Tenny Geragos leading. They've handled major cases before.
Right.
Brian Steele also joined the team recently.
Okay. And the prosecution.
It's an 8-person team.
Yeah.
One name that stands out is Maureen Ryan Comey. She was involved in the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution, which was obviously successful.
So experienced lawyers on both sides. And the judge.
Judge Arun Subramanian. He's a President Biden appointee. And interesting side note, Diddy's family members were apparently in court for the openings.
Right. So let's just pull this together. We've heard the opening shots, 2 very, very different narratives.
Extremely different. Prosecution paints this picture of a long-term criminal operation. Sex trafficking, violence, coercion, blackmail. They're arguing it was an organized enterprise, which is key for that racketeering charge.
A criminal enterprise built on exploiting people.
That's their core argument. Built on control, lack of real consent.
And then the defense comes back, admits, yes, there was anger, there was violence, even calling that video indefensible domestic violence.
Right, a significant admission.
But they say, hold on, this wasn't trafficking, this wasn't racketeering, this was an unconventional lifestyle maybe, but consensual.
Consensual adult relationships, albeit maybe wild ones. Their whole case seems to hinge on convincing the jury the alleged victims had agency, made choices, and weren't criminally exploited in the way the prosecution claims.
The stakes couldn't be higher for Combs, could they? Life in prison is on the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If convicted on these charges, particularly racketeering and sex trafficking, the penalties are severe, much more so than for individual assault charges.
So listening to all this initial back and forth, it leaves you with a really complicated thought, doesn't it? You've got these totally conflicting stories, but you also have the defense admitting to what they call indefensible violence. So as this trial goes on, how does the jury untangle all that? How do you draw the line between relationships that are maybe unconventional, maybe even unhealthy, but consensual, and outright criminal exploitation?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Distinguishing those lines, especially when you factor in acknowledged violence and power dynamics, it's incredibly complex.
Something to definitely keep in mind as we see the evidence unfold.
For sure. It's going to be a fascinating and likely difficult trial to follow.